There may be a deal in the offing, perhaps even this weekend. Israeli hostages for a ceasefire, perhaps a permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip after 10 months of war. President Biden is very keen to get that deal, probably also in the week of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. He really wants that deal under his belt. He has warned all the participants not to undermine that deal. The question is, why should they listen to him now if they haven't listened to him before? Let's speak to Gershon Baskin, Middle East Director for the International Communities Organization and former peace negotiator, hostage negotiator, who has in the past been involved in negotiations with Hamas. He's a regular friend of the program. Gershon, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's good to speak to you. Do you have any reason to be more optimistic this time than on previous occasions about a possible deal, finally?
The only reason for some optimism is that it seems that the mediators, the United States, the Qataris, and the Egyptians, seem more resolved to get an agreement now than ever before in the last more than 10 months. There was this joint communique that was signed by President Biden, President Sisi from Egypt, and the Emir of Qatar, in which they let it be known that they were putting an ultimatum on the table, and they were also putting their own bridging proposals on the table, which is the first time they've done that. Apparently, they did that over the last 2 days, and the teams, the Israelis went back to Israel. The Hamas people are in Doha, where the meeting took place. It was decided that technical teams would meet next week. But the reports coming out, at least from the Hamas side, are not so optimistic. At least two Hamas spokespeople said that the Americans put new Israeli conditions on the table, and that's not a good sign. But we still don't have the official Hamas response.
Right. Are the Israelis listening to President Biden? Because in the past, Mr. Netanyahu said he was listening, but then it became clear that he wasn't listening. He had his own agenda.
I think the situation is more or less between Biden and Netanyahu. It still remains clear that Netanyahu is not interested in ending the war, and this is one of the conditions of Hamas, that this ceasefire must lead to the end of the war. The Americans are pushing very heavily to get the end of the war. They have an additional reason now with the election campaign almost in full swing, and they would like this issue removed from Kamala Harris's need to address it. But still, there are significant gaps between the Israeli position and the Hamas position, and the Israelis are first and foremost concerned with issues of security, and they put conditions on the table that Hamas won't agree to.
I guess, to put it very bluntly and simply, if one of the Israeli conditions is the complete destruction of your negotiating partner or the people on the other side of the table, as in Hamas, it is understandable that they would never agree to such conditions.
Right. Well, that's not a condition in the negotiation. That is the Israeli policy.
Yeah.
The condition in the Israeli negotiating team is to ensure that the Gaza-Egypt border is sealed from smuggling weapons. That's the way that Hamas was able to arm itself so heavily for years. Israel wants to have some kind of monitoring mechanism in the middle of the Gaza Strip that would make sure that armed combatants, militants from Hamas and other groups are not moving from the south of the Gaza Strip to the north of the Gaza Strip and rebuilding their capabilities there. There are other similar conditions. Israel wants a buffer zone around the Gaza Strip so that anyone who enters the buffer zone, it's a dead zone. They would be shot in order to avoid something like October 7th again. So Israel's security concerns are real.
And legitimate, one would argue, right?
Yeah, they are legitimate. The question is, or not the question, the issue is that Hamas won't agree to any of them. So the Americans, the Egyptians, and the Qataris have to either find putting pressure on both sides to make compromises, or they need to find answers that will appease Israel's security concerns and enable Hamas to get what it wants. It's a difficult negotiation.
What about the new leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, who is in the Gaza Strip somewhere, it is thought? Obviously, this is someone that the Israelis would dearly like to either capture or kill, like some of the other Hamas leaders who've had a similar fate. What do you think he wants at the moment?
Well, he has had the final word since these negotiations began months ago. And the people in the Hamas leadership, including Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated, said that we consult with each other and we make decisions together, but in the end, Yahya Sinwar has the final word. Today, people are saying he not only has the final word, he probably has the only word. He appointed the negotiating team. They're the same people who were negotiating before, but they are reporting directly to him. He's a tough cookie. No, it's going to be very tough to make a deal with him. And he knows that he's a dead man walking. He knows that as soon as he comes out from the bunkers, from the tunnels, the Israelis will eventually get him. He's not afraid to die, as far as we know. In fact, he believes it's his God-given duty to be a martyr for Palestine, and his intent is to kill as many Israelis along the way that he can, maybe even Israeli hostages.
On the hostages, the last figure I think we heard was 125 still alive.
115.
115. Is that a realistic figure, do you think?
Them are alive. It is assumed that the majority of them are no longer alive, either killed by Hamas or killed by Israeli bombs. But we don't know their fate. One of the Israeli demands in the negotiations is to get a comprehensive list from Hamas of all the hostages and their condition, and Hamas refuses this.
Why do you think they're refusing that?
Well, one reason is I'm sure that they can't account for everyone. They don't know where everyone is. They don't control the entire Gaza Strip. There are probably hostages that they lost contact with their people who are holding them. They could be in tunnels in different parts of the Gaza Strip. They could be in private homes. We know that hostages were kept in homes as well. We can assume that some hostages are probably buried underneath rubble of buildings that were bombed by Israel. So it'll be a very difficult task for them to put this together, for them to return all the hostages dead and alive. And I would assume, I've been cautioning hostage families, that there is a chance that some of these hostages may never be found and returned.
And the assumption, as you said earlier, is that the majority of them may not be alive anymore.
That's what the Israelis are saying behind closed doors. There's an official number that they have documented who's alive and who's dead, but the number of dead hostages is much higher in the private discussions behind closed doors than they leak to the media.
Just finally and briefly, Gershon, on a scale of 1 to 10, I know it's very hard to second guess any of this. How likely is it that, we're going to see the end of this war in the next month?
Oh, I have no way of knowing. It has to end. The destruction, the death, the horror of this war. The red lines that have been crossed, the moral red lines that have been crossed both by Israel and Hamas are beyond imagination. And we're talking about war crimes here committed by both sides and an enormous amount of suffering. 2 million people homeless in Gaza with disease spreading right now. And Israelis are still in trauma. And so many of these soldiers are going to come back from Gaza with experiencing really post-trauma from the things that they saw and the things that they did. It's horrible. It really has to end, and the international community has to help as well. I mean, I think that the British and the Americans have to tell Israel that they are going to stop fueling this war. There are warships from Britain and from America in the Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, in the Persian Gulf, who have Israel's back if Israel is attacked by Iran and Hezbollah. But these countries that have been providing Israel with bombs to drop in Gaza should stop.
And I think, this is an opportunity under these appalling circumstances to finally come up with some sort of horizon of dignity for the Palestinians, a recognition of a Palestinian state. That would be good, but that doesn't seem to be on the cards either at the moment, does it?
Well, the British government, the Labour government, said that they would recognize the state of Palestine. It's about time that they did that. And
I'm talking about the Americans more.
Their political house and sorry,
I'm thinking more of the Americans here. I know the British government has said this, but the Americans have to give the lead on this.
The Americans really have to do it. Once the Americans do it, everyone will fall into line and do it as well. But that's not going to end the occupation. The Palestinians need to get their political house in order. They need unity. They need new leadership. We in Israel have to get rid of Netanyahu and his gang of thieves and criminals who are running our government. We need new leaders, and our political horizon is really, really narrow in terms of the offings of the people out there. There's very few people who are presenting any kind of vision, any kind of horizon of hope, and that's very sad. This needs to open up, and we need political change.